Hello, everyone. My name is Matthew Livingston, and today I'll be presenting on eating bugs to save the planet, developing appealing brewdeck cicada recipes to introduce the public to entomology. So first, here's just some introduction and background about me and my research. I'm a student at Princeton High School, and I've been researching insect eating or entomophagy for about 3 years at this point. It's a popular practice in around two-thirds of the country around the world, and there's around 1,900 species of edible insects. Um, I've raised some of these species, such as crickets, mealworms, and black soldier flies. And then the reason to eat insects is because they have a great feed conversion efficiency, meaning that if you give them feed to eat, they'll be amazing at converting that feed into their own body mass, which is much better than, let's say, common livestock such as cows and chickens. And then in comparing greenhouse gas emissions, insects are much better at emitting many less greenhouse gases in comparison to these common livestock. And they're also just as nutritious, containing many important minerals, metals, and all essential amino acids for human growth. Insects are also a great solution to combating food insecurity around the world, especially in low income areas where many people don't have access to food and they don't have enough space to raise these livestock like cows and chickens. So there's a need for a very nutritious food source to feed these people. And then there's already a long-standing amount of insect eating in indigenous traditions. In many indigenous communities, insect eating is commonplace, and they use it as a staple part of their diets. However, in the Western world, we usually don't see insect eating as something promising or prevalent because of the association between insects and pests, death, and disease. So the brewdeck periodical cicadas come out every 17 years, and their latest emergence was this spring, 2021, in the northeast coast of the U.S. So they are an extremely abundant food source for a short period of time for many animals and including humans. So to be able to use this as actually a viable food source, they need to be captured and frozen. And only certain communities have these brewdeck cicadas. For example, Princeton was very fortunate to have lots of them emerge. The cicadas are great for the environment as they help with tree pruning, and as mentioned before, they're an incredible food source for many animals that eat them. And they're very sustainable too, meaning that they're not going to be emitting a lot of greenhouse gases, and you don't need to put in much energy towards raising them since you just harvest them from the wild. These brewdeck cicadas, since they're also so prevalent, this allowed for lots of media coverage and thousands of comments to be collected about public opinion on the cicadas through many social media sites like Instagram and Facebook. So some objectives for this experiment were to find palatable ways to prepare cicadas, to kind of make the public more willing to try them, to gauge opinion of taste through some socially distant in-person tasting events, to gauge public opinion of cicadas and entomophagy as a whole, which was done through social media comments, and then finally outreach to the Princeton community, which was very important towards getting people to learn more about the practice of insect eating. So there were two hypotheses for this because there were sort of two experiments involved. The first one, in relation to the social media comments, was that the majority of the public comments with entomophagy are likely to be negative because, as I mentioned before, the Western world often views insect eating as sort of like a barbaric practice, not something very related to our day-to-day lives, and something more disgusting versus practical. And then in terms of the tasting, cicada recipes were hypothesized to have a higher taste rating when they contain the insects in disguised form, meaning that people would be more likely to try ground up cicadas where they can't really see the cicadas versus whole cicadas where they can see the entire insect and therefore, in theory, be more scared of it. So for the tasting, two in-person socially distant tastings were conducted, and beforehand the cicadas were cleaned and people were asked if they had any potential allergies. That way we could prevent all sorts of diseases or allergies from happening at these tastings. And a variety of cicada products were made, which will be showcased in the next slide. And then to the participants, of which are 18, a survey was given to measure taste on a rating from 1 to 5, 1 being the worst tasting, 5 being the best tasting. And then the results were analyzed to determine the most appealing recipes for the most amount of people. So here we can see some of the cicada products that were offered at the event. We have cicada banana bread, pumpkin bread, deep fried, cicada stew with Old Bay seasoning, chocolate covered cicadas, cicada cookies, soft shell cicadas, deep fried cicadas, cicada brownies, and there was also a cicada smoothie. And then next, for the comments, We analyzed the media coverage we got at these events, which was broadcast on news outlets such as NBC New York, NJ.com, ABC Philadelphia, and Fox News. So we took the NJ.com Facebook post, which received roughly 2,000 comments, not even counting the replies. And then we classified 1,200 of these comments into multiple different categories to sort of gauge the public opinion. This Facebook post was mainly centered around the cicada tacos. So here are some examples of comments in the classifications. So over here, we could see xenophobia and regional bias, which was one classification. And this basically means that this referred to comments that were offensive to certain groups of people. So this includes racism, treating America as a third world country, and then just general extreme negativity towards the people practicing insecting versus the practice itself. And then there's also disgust. So people verbally expressing that through the comments with words such as ew, ugh, or even just emojis portraying disgust in any way, shape, or form. However, on the positive side, we have willing to try an insect, which are people that vocally expressed that they are willing to try an insect, along with having eaten an insect, meaning that they have eaten one in the past. I think the most common types were grasshoppers and crickets. And then back to negative again, we have a fear allergy category, which refers to fear surrounding the allergy that cicadas can pose, as people that are allergic to dust mites and seafood also have a potential cicada allergy. And then finally, there's humor, which was treated as a force of negative here because we could see that it kind of undermines the whole practice of insecting. It takes away the seriousness of it by making maybe sarcastic comments like, oh, that's so good. Whereas in reality, they're really just trying to portray their negative opinion of insecting. So here we start with the results. And out of the 1,200 Facebook comments, 1,119 of them were negative, which is a massive 93.3%, and only 6.8% were positive. So taking a deeper look at the negative comments, we could see that 44% of them were related to disgust, 8% to humor, 3.8% to fear and allergy, 10% to xenophobia, which was surprisingly high, and then 34% to other, which was just general negative remarks about the cicadas in general. So what prompted these comments in the first place was a question, would you try cicadas or not? People that simply answered a no, a nope, or something along those lines were mainly classifying to others, along with those that did a negative reaction, such as a dislike. And then continuing with the positive comments here, we could see that 42% were willing to try an insect and very vocal and such. If a person just commented a single yes as a comment in response to the question of would they try cicada, they were not counted as willing to try the insect because we count those as sort of vocally expressing that they would be willing to try some. But there's still 42%, which is a very high number, 48% other, and then roughly 10% that have eaten insects in the past. So here are the results for the in-person tasting. Just looking at the number of people that ate them, the most number of people compared to the highest taste ratings, we can see that the cicada brownie, cookie, chocolate covered cicada, and stir-fried cicada were very popular, all having mean taste scores of 4.3 or above, which is very high. And then all of them had 12 or more people eating the products, meaning that the general consensus of people at these tastings was that these products were the best. However, it's important to acknowledge the sources of error and bias that were in this experiment, as insect tasting participants for the in-person event went willingly, as it was advertised as an insect eating event. So people that weren't really interested in the practice wouldn't be going. So that could contribute to maybe why there was such a high taste rating for many of these products. The comments on Facebook were not representative of the entire population, as the only people that were commenting were ones that were very opinionated and willing to put in the time and effort to make a comment versus just to keep silent. And then also there's the preference for certain cuisines. So at the tasting, people might prefer sweet foods, people might prefer savory, and that could have skewed the taste ratings. But also in media coverage, the data that was looked at was related to the cicada tacos. So if someone didn't like Mexican food, let's say, then they'd be less likely to give a positive comment towards insecting in general and more likely to give a negative comment towards the cicada tacos. And then finally, of course, being allergic or fearing an allergic reaction was something that was very prevalent, as people being more likely to give a negative response towards eating insects because of the allergy. So some conclusions that could be made from this experiment were that cicadas masked by the familiar flavors with the highest rank. So we see that the stir-fried cicadas and chocolate-covered were extremely highly ranked despite being in whole form. This means that it's most likely the taste that has the most impact for people. So stir-fried cicadas tasted like familiar other stir-fried foods like chicken masked by the soy sauce, and chocolate-covered ones were masked by the chocolate, along with the cookie and brownie. And then, as hypothesized, the public reception of entomology was still extremely negative through the comments, and there was a shocking amount of xenophobia, which we hope to reduce in any future outreaches we do for the community. However, in the minority of these comments, a small yet strong group was willing to try insects, which is good and something that can be taken advantage of. So then some future directions for the project would be to shift the public opinion through exposure, through maybe an event like the Insect Eating Festival, as described in a paper by Leo Guanta in 2018. Experimenting with more prevalent edible insects that are around for longer and that could actually be raised in a commercial setting, so such as crickets, mealworms, and black soldier flies, all very promising edible insects. Getting more media coverage on these other edible insects to try and increase thought exposure towards the practice of entomology, and just hearing that's good more often is going to make you believe that's a good practice. And then finally, just creating the new recipes with strong masking flavors that are likely to keep people wanting to try insects and having positive taste reactions. So that's all for my presentation. Thank you all for listening, and here's the sources I used.